Yo, what's the dealio, man? Listen, you already know I got a banger for you today, all right? In this video, I just want to do I want to do a video breaking down some of the biggest movers today that I saw on my watch list, right? And what to expect tomorrow, okay? From these exact same stocks, okay? Now, this is a little bit unique because tomorrow we do have FOMC, which means that Jerome Powell is going to be speaking tomorrow. Now, what they're saying is rate cuts, because this tomorrow is going to be a rate cut decision, right? What they're saying is it's like a 87% chance that rate cuts are going to just stay, and they're expecting rate cuts to happen in September, right? Now that's when September comes, right? With these rate cuts, if that's when it comes, then that means that the market could be going up sky high. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk about stocks that had some pretty big moves today. They closed on the day. That's why I'm doing this video after the market closed, and then you know, what you can expect to them based on the levels of today. All right. So I'm gonna start with two stocks. They're in the same sector, right? They got affected by the same thing. Okay. So the first stock is going to be First Solar, and also we're going to do Inphase. Okay, First Solar and Inphase. Now, both of these stocks had some pretty rough days today. Okay, pretty rough days today. Now, if we look at it, let me see, Fslr. All right, if we look at First Solar, okay, so they're down 17% today. All right, they gapped down. Most of the movement was a gap down, so you didn't really get to get that move if you didn't swing it overnight. But that's $31 that they're down for the day. Okay, and then the other stock is going to be Inphase, right? They're down 23% today, which is $11, and most of that movement is a gap down as well. Okay, so what happened with these two stocks is the bill was passed that if by the year 2028, okay, 2028, all people who go solar will no longer be able to receive tax credits. Okay, so because I sold solar door to door, I understand this. So let me break this down for you guys if you don't understand exactly what this means. When I was selling solar, it was an incentive that the government did, right? This was Joe Biden, right? And I don't care about the politics. I'm just telling you what happened. So Joe Biden. So basically, to get people to want to go green, okay, to go green, they said if you finance a solar system, right, or if you buy it cash, you will be able to get something called a tax credit. What this means is the tax credit was 30%. So 30% of your total financed amount, or your total amount that you bought in cash, you'll be able to basically write that off on taxes. Okay, what this did was it incentivized a lot of people to go solar, right? Because they could write this off on their taxes. So people that may have owed the IRS 10K, right? They may get a solar system that's worth 40K and be able to write it off on their taxes, right? And then they could absorb how much they owed the IRS. Okay, so it's basically a tax write-off. So they're saying by the year 2028, no more. Okay, no more. So that's why these solar stocks have dropped. All right, that's why these solar stocks have dropped. So Enphase, they make the inverters and the microinverters and the generators and the power, the batteries and all of that stuff, okay? And then First Solar is the actual solar company, all right? So let's go to the charts on First Solar and Inphase, and let's talk about what you could expect from them tomorrow. Now, remember, tomorrow is FOMC, so we could just chop around all day until Jerome Powell actually does speak. That is a possibility as well. All right, I want to be very clear about that. But let's go to Enphase and FSLR. All right, so if we're looking at the daily chart here, all right, on FSLR, they had some motion. All right. They have broke out. So they have broke out right here, came back down, then they broke out again. All right. They had created this gap. The uptrend right there filled that gap right there. Then they just been gapping up, right? Gapping up, right? So here's what happened. So they gapped up from here to here. They filled the gap this day. And then this was in May, on May 12th, right? So they gapped up from 155 all the way to 175. So they gapped up $75, right? Then they peaked up here at 198. All right. And then what happened? Then it came down, right? And then they created this little cup right here. And then boom. All right. So they came up. And then yesterday, the news came out and then they gapped down. All right. So when I'm looking at this, so we do have a gap from here to here. All right. So this is the most recent gap now. All right. But if we're looking at the levels from over here, so we got this one right here. And then I would say around here as well. Okay. So FSLR realistically could be coming down to like 122. All right. So if we go look in the intraday, we look at the 15-minute to see what happened. All right. So they opened up, they tried to come up, and then they just kind of been bouncing off right here. Okay. So if we see FSLR lose this level, if we see it come back below 135, then the next range would be like 122. All right. So that's what could potentially be happening on FSLR. It's trying to come up right here. Okay. So it may try to come fill this gap right here, but with what's going on in the actual solar industry, that's a pretty big hit to the solar industry. So we don't know exactly if it's going to be able to fill that gap soon, or if this may take some time for this gap to fill right here. All right. The next stock, same industry, is Inphase. So let's look at Inphase. All right. So Inphase on the daily time frame. So look at Inphase. So Inphase, let's go back to January real quick. All right. So look where Inphase dropped from, just so that you guys understand. All right. Inphase at one point was up here. Okay. At 142. They've touched $300, right? Look at where they came from. They were all the way up here, right? They were all the way up here at 340. Okay. This was in 2022. This was when the solar industry was absolutely booming. Okay. This is when the solar industry was booming. All right. And then the solar industry had a pullback, and look what happened. Enphase was a direct victim of that. Okay. So back in around January, they dropped from $100 and they were at about 77. And so from January to now, they're at $34, right? So just to give you guys some perspective there. All right. Now let's look at this. Now let's look at what's going on. So we got right here. So this was a gap. Okay. So Enphase had gapped up, right? Gapped down. They came down right here and they started to fill this gap right here, right? So look what happened. So they on today they went from, they closed right here. They closed at today is Friday. This is the daily on Inphase. Okay, yeah, here it is. It's the gap so low I didn't even see it. All right. So on Monday they were right here, right? So they closed right here at $46. Now today they opened up at $34, right? So that's $12 right there, okay? So we have another gap that has been created. So I'm going to delete this gap, right? I'm going to delete this gap right there. And now we're going to create a new gap. So from here to here, okay? Boom. So now we got this right here. So now we got a gap from 36 all the way to 40, 43, $44, right? And if we go into intraday, let's go to a 30-minute, look what happened. Okay, kind of very similar thing. Gap down, came down a little bit, tried to push up, right? Didn't really make too much noise. It went from 33 to 35. It moved $2 throughout the day. All right. So I think that Inphase could potentially be coming down more. But with Inphase, it's kind of like how much further can they go, right? If we zoom out, we're talking like close to their IPO prices, right? Look, they IPO'd over here, okay, back in, well, they IPO'd a while ago, back in 2012, okay, but they were at, what, $10, right? And then they started to make some headway around here back in 2019. So we're going back to 2019 levels, all right? That's what's so crazy about this. That's 6 years ago, okay? So Inphase is in the same place that it was about 6 years ago at this point, okay? So we got 37. So we could say like this is a level right here, 34.11. We got right here, okay? We got right here also. So 21. All right, so now let's go back to right here and let's see. Okay, let's see what's going on. So now these are now the levels for Inphase, right, on the daily time frame. So if we break below right here at 34, then we could be coming down on Inphase down to like $27. All right, so just think about that. This is 2019 prices that you're getting at Inphase. All right, do I think that you should trade Inphase? That's up to you, right? I'm not a big fan of trading them. I traded them last week because they were inside of that gap, and I knew that that was going to be upward momentum. But besides that, I wouldn't really trade them. I don't even know if I would buy shares of them, to be honest, because we got to see what goes on in the actual solar industry at this point, right? What's going to happen in the solar industry? Because what are they going to do to make this stuff, I don't want to say right, but what are they going to do to combat it so that the solar industry is thriving? We're going to see what happens. All right. So the next stocks that were big movers is Crwv. Crwv was a very big mover, and some people call it a subsidiary of NVIDIA because NVIDIA holds a lot of Crwv. They buy a lot of Crwv and APLD, all right, applied. Now let's look at Crwv, all right, on the charts, and let's go there. All right, now Crwv just IPO'd not too long ago, all right? So they just got a lot of excitement right now. So they IPO'd in March, okay? So I personally think that Crwv is already overvalued, and they're going to end up coming down. They're going to come down. All the excitement right now, I get it, but Crwv is going to be coming down. But let's look at the charts and let's see. All right, so we got Crwv right here. All right, so just looking at this chart, it's a very small chart. We only have a few months of data, big picture. But if we look at it right here, let's go. So yeah, so this is all-time highs right here. And if we go and we look at the 30-minute, right, let's look at the previous like week on the 30-minute. So we got a support level right here, right around this level right here, okay, at 143. All right, we got this is resistance for this day, and we got this right here as well. All right, and then we got this right here also. Okay, so for tomorrow, I would look for a continuation on Crwv to break all-time highs again, and the reason being is because I see a bull flag right here, so it made a move to the upside right there. All right, and then we got this right here, so this is the flag. All right, and then boom right here. All right, so that's the flag right there. So if Crwv breaks above 175.32, then I would take calls on Crwv because it could blast off, and it could be going to like, let's see, Crwv could be going to like potentially like 190. All right, so it could move another potentially $20 tomorrow, but do I think that that's going to happen? No, I think that FOMC is going to slow Crwv down tomorrow, and it might chop around a little bit. All right, but that's Crwv, okay? It has some moves today. Has some nice moves today, but I think that Crwv is going to see some continuation. Now, I always say anything I say could be invalidated, okay? So obviously do your own due diligence and stuff like that. I'm just breaking down what were the biggest movers and what do I think you should be looking for tomorrow, all right? Now, the next stock, the last stock that was a big mover today that made some noise is going to be Reddit, okay? Ticker symbol RDDT. So with Reddit, what happened was they had some news come out. Reddit has some news that came out about their ad tools and stuff like that, okay? Now, if you've ever traded Reddit, I've traded them before. They're a very volatile stock. They move big, okay? They make big moves. They're a very volatile stock. So with Reddit, they had some news come out with their ad tools. So, you know, obviously investors got very excited. This happened before the market opened. They gapped up, all right? So Reddit ended up gapping up. So let's look at their charts and let me show you what I see and for tomorrow as well. So look, yesterday they closed right here at 126. They gapped up all the way to 133, okay? So they went crazy. They went from 133 all the way to 146. All right, that's $13 in 30 minutes, okay? So in 30 minutes, really 15 minutes, they went from here, from 133, and they went to 146. So they moved $13 in 15 minutes. That is insane, all right? And then they rejected and they came down right here, okay? Now this support held, right? But this is a gap right here, okay? So we got from 132.89 to 127. Really like 126.30, okay? So we'll drag this down a little bit more because that's where it closed, okay? So that's where we're at right here. So tomorrow, if we see Reddit come down below 132.80, okay, this is a 15-minute. You could look at the hourly, and it's a little bit cleaner. But if Reddit comes below 132 like 80, then I think that we're gonna see Reddit come down to 126, and then it could potentially bounce off that level and then come back to the upside, right? But this is a pretty big gap, and it's sitting right there at that gap. All right, so so that's what I think about Reddit. Reddit is very volatile, like I said, but because it's right there at that gap, and you see that Reddit just moved $13 in 15 minutes when the market opened, right? So they have that ability to do that to the upside and the downside, right? So I think that Reddit, they're probably going to fill that gap sometime this week, maybe next week, but they're very close to that gap right now. They could gap down overnight, and then investors could, you know, make that move, and then they could go to the upside. We don't know, right? These are all hypotheticals, right? But yeah, Reddit has that gap right there. So I think that we could see some a bearish move just to fill that gap, and then we could come to the upside. All right, but that's those were some of the big movers today, and those are what I think for tomorrow as well. I hope that helped. I hope that made sense. And I always say, man, make sure you guys do your due diligence and make sure you guys are learning how to read these charts efficiently and effectively. All right. So like I always say, make sure you get up out of your head, go get into this world, because your head is a dangerous place to live. All right. And also remember, the more you study, the less you worry. All right. I'm going to see you guys on the next video. Peace.